All good.
Waiting for Councillor Kudak. We are out of public excluded, back into the open. Waiting for our missing councillor to arrive, then we'll continue with 9.2. Item 9.2, transport major projects updates. Nick and Jason, please.
Jason is on leave, so I'll just introduce Richard O'Kane, who is in his day job. In his substantive role, he's the Senior Project Manager for Cameron Road Stage 2, and for a period of time now, he's the Director of Major Projects in an acting capacity. So he will give us an update on the 5 major projects, and one of those 5, connecting the Mount, we will do a bit of a deep dive, and Chris Barton is here to walk us through the IBC, which is item 9.3. And I think if we start with Richard and have him walk through the 4 projects, and if there are any questions on the connecting the Mount project, that we'll leave that for the following item, the deep dive. I hope that's okay, and I'll hand over to you, Richard.
Thank you, Nick. Kia ora. Good afternoon, Your Worship, councillors and learned colleagues. Thanks for the introduction. Yes, my name is Richard O'Kane, the Acting Programme Director for Transportation Major Projects Portfolio. I'm joined by my learned colleague, Chris Barton, who is the Senior PM for PEI Te Riko and Connecting Mount Maunganui. To introduce the report, purpose is to provide a major projects update. The recommendation is that the Vision, Planning, Growth and Environment Committee receives the report, Transport Major Projects Update, approves the update and acknowledges a separate endorsement or otherwise for the Connecting Mount Maunganui indicative business case is required as a resolution to a separate item on the agenda. While in the interest of time, I will take the report and presentation as read. I would, with your agreement, like to take a couple of minutes to talk to the funding finance budget breakdown slide on page 72 of the agenda, as I believe it will provide some useful context.
By all means.
That be agreeable? Okay. We have the 5 projects listed. However, to separate the top 2 from the bottom 3 to the current project position, as this helps to demonstrate the funding element, which is the first 4 columns. Te Riko and PEI have their funding secured as they have proceeded through the DBC, SSBC process, which locks that in. The lower 3 projects are currently going through the IBC, DBC or SSBC, single stage business case or detailed business case process, and at different stages. So the secured funding position is still...
Can you just pause it? Can we have that in full, not acronyms, so we know what you're actually talking about?
Yes, of course. Apologies. I will go back there. So Te Riko and Papamoa East Interchange have their funding secured as they have proceeded through the detailed business case or single stage business case process, which locks that funding in. The lower 3 projects are currently going through the indicative business case, detailed business case or single stage business case process and are at different stages. So the funding position is still very much unconfirmed, as is the final scope to a degree of the projects. I will recap on P50 and P95 terminology as it's important. P50 represents the project cost with sufficient funding to provide a 50% level of confidence in the outcome. There is a 50% likelihood that the final project cost will not exceed this value. P95 represents the estimate of costs, such that there is a 95% probability of the project being delivered within that cost estimate. Therefore, I introduced a light orange headed column titled LTP Budget P50, which is the 5th column from the left. These figures relate to the baseline P50 outturn cost of the combined transport and, where applicable to scope, Waters that forms part of the indicative business case, detailed business case or single stage business case. And therefore is what our funding partners also consider the P50 budget for financial decision-making processes. It is important to note that this figure includes proportionate risk and contingency allowances that have been considered and built in throughout the planning process and subsequently approved by funding partners as part of the detailed business case or single stage business case approval. Moving on to the adjacent brown column, LTP 2434 budget P95. This is the P95 figure for the combined transport and waters, again, where applicable, as not all projects have water scope elements. This figure is also included within the indicative business case or detailed business case or single stage business case. Important to note the P95 figure is not approved as budget to expend. It's really a contingency that is only released by NZ, the New Zealand Transport Agency, following a change process. This introduces the dark blue column, funding risk contingency, as this figure talks to the variable difference between the P50 approved and the P95 unapproved from an NZTA, New Zealand Transport Agency perspective, and only considers transport scope. This figure is a New Zealand Transport Agency funding figure listed as funding risk contingency, as it requires a change management process that I previously alluded to. By way of the New Zealand Transport Agency cost scope adjustment process for any of this contingency to be released to the project and ultimately, more importantly, co-funded by New Zealand Transport Agency. The funding risk contingency for the two projects currently in implementation or construction, Tariko and Papamoa East Interchange, are reviewed with NZT, New Zealand Transport Agency, on a regular basis as part of the project management process. Finally, the light blue current forecast P50 column is really a current outturn cost forecast for the delivery of the project and is constantly updated and ultimately would be the column that advises where the current project is tracking to. Worth a note here is although that the Tariko and Papamoa East Interchange projects are well advanced from the other three projects and have gone through the pre-implementation detailed design process, we are talking about very large horizontal infrastructure construction projects that have 2.5 and 1.5 years construction remaining respectively. A good indicator of this quantum is in the final column titled Actuals to Date, as it provides perspective on the work that's actually completed to date. One more note regarding funding approval. Typically, a detailed business case or single stage business case contains an early design scope stroke intent, usually to a maximum of 30%, which although has a full cost estimate produced by the detailed business case or single stage business case specialist and a parallel cost estimate conducted under TCC instruction by an independent specialist, it is only as the project develops through the pre-implementation detailed design process, which includes the existing services, intrusive investigation surveys, etc., that we fully develop a risk profile of the project, especially horizontal infrastructure projects versus vertical single site developments. It would be a proposal that this rationale is maybe provided moving forward as part of the major projects update report. Thank you for your time, and we're happy to take any questions you may have.
Thank you very much, Richard, for your presentation. Do I have any questions?
Just a quick one, the connecting Mount Maunganui in red, and then is that the note down the bottom? It's not in red because it's a...
Yeah, I could address that one. So yes, and we'll go into that a little bit more in the upcoming report, but the reason for that is just highlighting that there is quite a substantial change from what was originally in the LTP to the current
Red
estimate.
would normally be a deficit, but the others are all deficits, so I didn't understand how to read it, so thank you.
Yeah, just highlighting it's not an issue.
Okay, thank you.
It's Mayor Mahay.
I'm just keen to understand that the P95 is the P95 actually P95? Like, do we have, how many projects actually go over our P95, and did Cameron Road go over a P95?
I might have to defer part of that answer to my learned colleague, Mr. Johansson, regarding stage one, I believe you're referring to, Cameron Road stage two. I'll defer that in a second, but I think the key element is how much work goes on in the detailed business case and the single stage business case with regard to building in proportionate risk and contingency into the P50 cost that then makes the P95 a much more realistic overrun cost, rather than be very careful to look at that as a target cost. You know, the projects that we look at the moment in the major projects portfolio are tracking to P50. Where I separated the top two from the bottom three is we can have much more surety from the top two because they've gone through the process and they're now in construction. So we only have what's hidden through the construction phase, whereas the bottom three, a huge development process has got to happen with the business cases and then detailed design to provide that surety. So P95 is a realistic contingency over and above the P50, which we work to the P50 though for delivery.
Yeah, to be that's probably worth a follow-up just to see how we are performing in terms of the P50s versus P95s, and how, by definition, obviously, the P95 we would deliver a more expensive outcome or costly outcome on 1 in 20 projects. I do suspect that number is a little bit higher than just the 1 in 20, and unfortunately, Cameron Road Stage 1 was one of them. But I haven't got the exact percentages in front of me, so that's something maybe we can report back to the next committee.
Thank you for that. Do I have any more questions for staff? No, Councillor Crowther.
Just one for our people out there who seem to not be fans of raised crossings. It says they're being rationalised on the Cameron Road Stage 2 design. Would you want to define rationalised? Does it mean sort of eliminated, deferred until the next government? You know, what are we thinking?
I'll reply via the chair. Thank you for the question. The Cameron Road Stage 2 project is currently undergoing the reworking of the business case, the original detailed business case, to align with the GPS. That is currently very much a work in progress, just started process, where the current position is the investment prioritisation method, which we look at how to align with the GPS, and a lot of the GPS lends towards removal of raised crossings. So I would think we would be taking those out where possible en route. They certainly wouldn't be on Cameron Road anyway. They would only be on the side roads, unless they're specifically and explicitly there for safety purposes. But that will flesh out over the next 2 months of the reworking of the business case. So I can probably say that we should update you as we go through the process, maybe the best way of looking at that.
Thank you, Richard. I think it's fair to say that'd always be for safety purposes, wouldn't they? So, but you've covered the odds there, so that's helpful.
Is there any more questions for staff? No, thank you very much, staff, for your presentation and the answers you've given us. I would now like to put the motion on the table that the Vision, Planning and Growth Environment Committee receives the report Transport major projects update, approves the update and acknowledges that a separate endorsement or otherwise for the Connecting Mount Maunganui indicative business case is required as a resolution to a separate item on this agenda. May I have a mover, please? Councillor Crowther and a seconder. Councillor Taylor. Councillor Crowther, do you wish to speak to the motion?
Good luck with the funding.
Thank you.
Councillor Taylor, no. All those in favour, say aye. Aye. Opposed? That motion is carried. Thank you. We
Thank you.
now move to item 9.3. The aforesaid Connecting Mount Maunganui indicative business case. Nick Johansson is to open, and Chris.
Yeah, so Chris Barton, as the senior project manager, is here to run us through this. Obviously, we presented that project in its full detail about 2 months ago, I think it was, and this is sort of the closeout of the business case. So what we're seeking here is an approval for it to go to the NZTA board. We've got Ben PC here from NZTA as well. We did have Susan Collins, who's the regional manager, playing a performance, I think is her title. We had her lined up for this morning. I managed to hold her as on the back burner for a couple of hours, but I think we've lost her participation. But between Ben and Chris, I'm comfortable that we'll be able to cover any questions you may have. Welcome, Ben.
All right. Kia ora everyone. I'm Chris Barton, Senior Project Manager in the Major Projects team. As outlined by Nick, this report seeks endorsement for the Connecting Mount Maunganui indicative business case, which proposes a recommended option to increase efficient and reliable operation of the transport network of the Hewletts Road, Totara Street and Maunganui Road area. This report does follow on from previous presentation on to this committee on the 9th of September, where the emerging preferred option of the IBC was presented. The final indicative business case, as attached to today's report and recommended for endorsement, is consistent with the previous presentation, so there's been no change to what was previously discussed. The Connecting Mount Maunganui project is the #1 priority project in the Transport System Plan program, and endorsement of this indicative business case is a big milestone for the project as the first key step towards delivery. The project is being jointly progressed by NZTA and Council, noting that the works span both state highway and local road networks. As outlined in the report, subject to the endorsement of the business case today by Council, the business case will then subsequently be recommended to NZTA for their endorsement. It's noted that funding to progress the next stage of the Connecting Mount Maunganui project beyond this indicative business case phase has not been prioritised in the 2024 to 2027 NLTP. And subject to NZTA endorsement of the indicative business case, further opportunities to consider options can be considered by Council, including potentially through the annual plan process. So, but not necessarily a subject for today, but just to give an indication of, I guess, where the next steps may be. It's also noted that the level of development of the design through this indicative business case phase is indicative. So as the project progresses through the next phases, there will be a lot more further scope development, investigations and options assessment through those next phases as well. I propose after that to take the report as read, but happy to take any questions on the report as drafted. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your report, Chris. Questions? Deputy Mayor School.
Thank you, Chris. Just on the recommendation D, it's approving progression to the next stage, including commitment of the budgeted TCC share of project funds, which you've just suggested there aren't any. So I'm not sure what that recommendation is trying to approve in terms of funds.
So that is to progress with the next phase, noting that TCC has budgeted for the next phases of the project within the long-term plan, council's long-term plan, but what hasn't been prioritised for funding is funding from NZTA and the National Land Transport Program. So that recommendation is to say if NZTA commit their share of the co-funding, which is currently highly unlikely, but that we would be able to proceed to the next phases of the project.
And then I'd just say, are we able to commit budgeted funds for one project when we haven't looked at all of our capital projects? That's an internal question directed at my mayor.
Are there any other questions for staff?
So yeah,
yeah.
I just wanted to understand that. So what we're saying is we don't have any funding going forward because that's what I was a bit confused as well. It's sort of that we were approving funds because I thought maybe NZT had changed their mind, but they haven't changed their mind. But on this indicative business case, if they approve that, then at least we know that they're sort of on board with the options that we've got, and hopefully they find some money somewhere.
Yeah, that's correct. I guess back to the initial point, getting endorsement of the indicative business case is the first key step in the program, and sets, I guess, the foundation for that next phase as and when funding is available to progress it.
And then, you've broken this down. I'm just interested, 6 million with 3 million on the local road, which we'd have 49% of, and then 3 million on the state highway, which should be fully NZTA. That seems like a lot of money to do a business case. Is that pretty normal, and is there ways to reduce that?
Yeah, those are the current estimates for the business case phase. Again, we would go through a more detailed planning exercise as and when we got to that. We'd hope that those are conservative estimates for those phases of the work, but they're probably not too far outside of the ballpark of where historical business case costs have been for a project of a similar scale.
Maybe I can just add to that too, that's not just looking at assumptions and writing on paper and numbers, etc., and engineering, but it's actually, there's some physical works involved with that, which is geotech investigations and those sorts of things, and understanding what pipes are in the ground and services and all of those sort of things that need to be taken into consideration to understand the fuller scope, constructability, and cost as well. So not just a desktop type work, which I can sort of understand if that were the case. The numbers look really big, but this is some heavy machinery out there as well.
Then just a follow-up to that. So if the indicative business case is approved, then we know NZTA are on board. Is there ever an opportunity, for example, if we paid to do these business cases, that we would get retrospective funding from NZTA?
We have tested that, and the answer quite clearly at the moment is no, in terms of retrospective funding opportunities. Again, it's that's the answer that we've had to date.
Thank you very much. Councillor Baker, you had a question?
Kia ora. Thank you, Barry. Just looking at point 47 around Ngāti Kuku's election to remove themselves because of the points stated there. So what are we talking about with significant compromises to the overall project benefits? Can you explain a bit about that part of the point 47?
Yeah, I might just give a high-level summary and then potentially hand over to Ben from NZTA, who's online, who is a little bit more familiar with the project through that phase. But one of the primary components of the benefits of the project is a grade separation at the Totara Hewletts intersection, and that's the primary concern from that group, particularly in terms of the view shaft. So we've looked at alternative options in terms of can we achieve the same level of transport benefit without that grade separation, and particularly a flyover going over in that direction. And that's where, there aren't any feasible options identified at this point in time that would achieve the strategic benefits that the project is looking to deliver. But Ben, are you potentially able to give it a little bit more context on that?
Yeah, so as a project, we looked at couple of grade options, so roundabouts primarily, and different forms of roundabouts at that intersection so that we wouldn't have any visual impact. And one of the biggest things that we found was, one, we end up taking a huge amount of property. So all that tank farm and then some of the portland on the right would end up being eaten into. But primarily roundabouts just didn't help with the flow of traffic, so they didn't achieve any of the transport benefits to the same extent that a partial grade separated flyover would. So that's what we mean by significant compromises to the overall project benefit. So primarily the affordability would start declining because you have to be buying a lot of property and it's expensive property, but primarily it just doesn't help with the transport. So there's no travel time benefits, there's no reduction in congestion, for example, or any significant reduction in congestion with it.
Thank you, Barry. Thank you. Councillor Crowther.
Two questions. One was following up on that. I note Ngāi Tukurangi are sort of seemingly happy with the proposal. Is it possible to sort of understand what in particular, is it just because I think they both can whakapapa to that marae. I'm just trying to tease out, like how much sort of strength of feeling is there across that whole rohe there, because it does seem like there may be two views and some may be seeing some benefits from the project based on what's in the report. I don't know who wants to answer.
Maybe Ben.
Chris, if you want to.
Yeah, that'd be good. Thank you.
So I think the key point is, as a project, we've worked with Ngāi Tukurangi and Ngāti Kuku extensively throughout the project. So both hapu have been involved throughout, and we had a number of hui at Marae to talk about the various options. I think where the key issue arises is Ngāti Kuku have a view that the industrial use of the land should change over time. So they have a long-term view that the Mount Maunganui industrial area and the port would basically retreat, and the area would be used for mixed residential and commercial housing. So their view of the intersection is such that if you didn't have any of the industrial area, then the intersection form and the structures would be the next highest feature, and then that would block the view to Mauao. And this becomes an irreconcilable point of conflict for them. Ngāi Tukurangi don't have the same issue, I guess. Ngāi Tukurangi are relatively open that they have commercial interests in and around the Mount Maunganui industrial area, and that they see that this project would benefit their hapu and their people to the same extent that it would benefit everyone else in Tauranga, and that those transport benefits are worthwhile pursuing. That's the issue in a nutshell. I think the other thing just with Ngāti Kuku is a lot of their view is also around the air pollution and how they would describe existing industry poisoning their people. There's been a few studies that I'm aware of in monitoring that the Regional Council has undertaken, and there has been a lot of work by councils and the hapu and industry to start working through some of those things.
Thank you, Ben. I think that's an excellent answer and very helpful to clarify it all. The other question I had, Chris, was sort of touched on it earlier with you, signalled this question. To me, even this government, I mean, they're investing more in public transport than any other government has. They're still seeing that as a core part of their looking at delivering economic outcomes, partly through just decongesting the network. So I am still concerned, as I've highlighted in a previous meeting, that taking out those bus lanes, which were initially a core part of this project. And I'm wondering if you've had a chance to sort of get a sense of, given the changing circumstances over the next decade or however long this is going to play out when they're building the project, you know, what percentage of the initial cost was actually roughly involved with putting in that priority for public transport along Monganui Road?
Yeah, thank you, councillor. So as you've highlighted there as a previous iteration of the emerging concept for connecting Mount Maunganui, it did include continuous bus lanes proposed along Maunganui Road. So as part of the recent incremental assessment, that's where, and just to be clear, incremental assessment is where we looked at the team looked at all of the individual interventions and the costs and benefits associated with each of those as an individual component. And that was acknowledging that previously the benefit cost ratio of the overall program was, below 1, which means it costs more than the benefits you're receiving. So for the Maunganui Road continuous bus lanes and the previous iteration, the cost of those was estimated at $79 million. And the assessed benefits attached to that was $30 million. So that was the economic incremental assessment attached to it, acknowledging that some of those costs, as an early indicative business case phase, there's potential for those to get maybe not quite be 100% right, but also acknowledging that it is intended as part of the next phase of the Connecting Mount Maunganui project, that some lower cost, high impact options along Maunganui Road do have the potential to be further investigated and considered. However, at this stage, that doesn't include looking further at continuous bus lanes along Maunganui Road, but also acknowledging there are opportunities for council to also consider that as a separate project in the long term if they desire and feel that that's of benefit.
Thank you very much. Councillor Kudak, you had your hand up.
Thank you. It's probably a question to Ben. If I can go back to the Hewlett's Totara intersection. What modelling has been done in terms of grade versus grade separation? Just thinking of the option there of having a multi-lane roundabout that might be signalised in terms of allowing, say, in morning peak, the bulk of the flow from Totara and Hewlett and city bound, stopping some traffic, eastbound. And I haven't thought about the afternoon peak, but there seems to be a feasible solution in terms of at-grade solution, in particular looking or considering the buildability and the traffic management of building a grade separated project, and thinking about the Bayfair projects, etc. I see the value because it was like the one between Maunganui and Hewlett's flyover. It was very effective. But in that situation there, it could be very challenging. And so has proper modelling been done in terms of those options of a multi-level signalised roundabout or semi-signalised roundabout?
So the short answer is no. So microsim modelling at an intersection level has not been done, and it wouldn't be done until we get to a DBC. What has been done is strategic transport modelling, so looking at the whole option as a whole. And so what we're relying on is basically experience and engineering experience, and then the feedback of what you see in multi-lane roundabouts. The primary issue is with that particular intersection, it's the right-hand turning traffic from Torture Street going into Hewletts Road, State Highway 2 to get across the bridge, and that's predominantly where the queue is. There's it's worse in the peak, so in particular the morning, but there's still a strong queue during into peak, and so that's the problem that we're trying to solve, is that right-hand merge essentially. At the moment, the traffic lights are basically stopping the thoroughfare along State Highway 2 to allow that right-hand movement, and then straight across into Torture Street South, if you like. What the analysis has shown, so we did do traffic counts, so we observed different periods of time for 15-minute blocks, is that the traffic flows turning right are greater than the design of that intersection at the moment, and they will only increase, or that will only worsen with the increase or the expected increase in transport demand. The other big issue with a roundabout is the size that you need. So I think I alluded to it around the property. All the property in Mount Maunganui is going to be expensive. It's not just the property that we'd have to be acquiring. We'd have to basically compensate the businesses for the loss of land, particularly for things like the tank farm and some of the other businesses where they have assets, and that's an integral part of their business. So that's how we've kind of come to the conclusion that a partial grade separated intersection is going to be more compact in form and solve the problems that we've got and deliver the transport benefits. But the key thing is that detailed intersection-based modelling has not been completed.
And there's a comprehensive response.
Thank you. Do you have any, Mayor?
Yeah, I'm just interested, I'm not sure if this is for you, Ben, or our team, is around the high occupancy vehicle lanes. And yeah, what sort of cost is involved in that? Obviously, you know, it's not in the NLTP at the moment, but is it something, it seems like quite simple with a few signs to put in the bus lanes, I would have thought, to get that moving. Is that
Do we
correct?
answer this one, Chris?
There you go.
Yeah, yes, Mayor. It is relatively simple. It's less than $3 million worth of cost if it's approved by the board. So what that will buy is design to do it safely, and then there's basically line signs and traffic control, so the traffic lights that will need to be adjusted, and a critical component of it is the enforcement equipment that would be required to enforce the T3, so 3 people or more sort of occupants in the actual vehicle. So between the 3 aspects, they kind of add up a little bit to about 3 million, just shy of $3 million. So I think it's 2.5 million plus some contingency.
And just subsequent to that, just noting that it's intended that that's not funded from council, that would be funded by NZTA through a full state highway improvements program.
Thank you. Any more questions?
Would that, in our opinion, would that have a significant impact? I know, like, when they say you take sort of 10% out of a lane, it can make quite a difference, is it?
Yeah, so there has been an independent study attached to that with significant travel time benefits and overall benefits attached to it. I can't recall the overall, but it had, from a benefit cost ratio perspective, it was around over 7 in terms of the benefit cost ratio for that intervention. So yes, significant benefits attached to that.
There's a challenge, Ben, find us the money.
Yeah, it's a challenge all over the country, unfortunately.
Do you have any more questions? No, questions are finished. I'd like to thank staff for their presentation and the answers to the questions. Thank you very much. I now put the motion on the table that the Vision Growth Environment Committee receives a report connecting Mount Maunganui indicative business case, endorses the connecting Mount Maunganui indicative business case as attached to this report, supports submitting the Connecting Mount Maunganui Indicator business case to the NZTA board and approves progressing the next phase of the project planning and design, including commitment of a budgeted TCC share of project funds subject to NZTA approval of co-funding. Do I have a mover, please? Glenn, Councillor Crowther, Councillor Currick. Councillor Crowther, do you wish to speak to it?
Thank you to staff for this, and I just want to acknowledge, Chris gave me a very helpful diagram, and I know there'll be people who'll be watching this on YouTube at some point who are geeky enough like me to know the regional land transport plan, and he solved a mystery for some of us in the city, which is that their number 3 project in the plan, Hewletts Road sub-area accessibility for 292 million, which didn't end up getting into the long-term plan for Tauranga City Council, even though it's the lead organisation, at only 38 million, I think, got in. That's actually a subset, as it turns out, of the Connecting Mount Maunganui project, which is number 4 in the regional land transport plan. And that was 455 million. So we are talking about Connecting Mount Maunganui as kind of like the holistic program or holistic business case. And it is interesting. I do want to note this because there are mayors around the Bay of Plenty and the people on the Regional Land Transport Committee who were not aware of that. I think when we're talking $750 million was what we were thinking, it's actually only a bit less than $500 million project, but it seems, you know, a learning point would be to get really clear on that kind of stuff in the future. And I just thank Chris again for highlighting that, and he drew a lovely little diagram. I did want to make the point that, you know, I strongly support this going to the next stage. I do want to acknowledge the concerns of Ngāti Kuku, and I think Ben outlined them very clearly from what I understand. In terms of the bus lanes, I'm still struggling because the cost of a flyover plus the additional lanes on Totara Street on Friday, we heard, were 140 million. And that's got a built-in contingency. And I'm kind of thinking $79 million for bus lanes on Maunganui Road, which we're told has been future-proofed to put in the bus lanes. We're talking more than half the cost of putting in a flyover, which I'm told is exceptionally expensive. And all those additional lanes all the way down Totara, knowing that those lanes are far more expensive than the $12 million cycleway that got, or shared path that got put in there. And I'm really struggling, and I'm worried that either the bus lanes will be dismissed because they're nowhere near as expensive as what the NZTA business case showed, or that the flyover and the additional lanes on Totara will be way more expensive than we're thinking now, because to me, those numbers don't stack up very well. I guess for me, I hope we take some learnings from it, because my sense of it is, having been involved in conversations throughout the Maunganui Road project, I don't see evidence that this council has truly future-proofed along that corridor to support the bigger plan to have bus lanes as the top priority along there. And that was in the guiding documentation initially back in the Tauranga Transport Program business case under Rick Currick as the chair of the committee back in 2017. And it, to my knowledge, is still there in the transport system plan as a key part of our strategic public transport network. And I really worry that we have used ratepayers' money to invest into things that jut out in roads and roundabouts and things that are disrupting this and making it incredibly expensive to retrofit those bus lanes. So if that's the case, I hope we don't do that again, because to me, that bus network is absolutely critical. And I would say one final thing. I just hope this gets over the line, because the Tauriko State Highway 29 offline RONs at more than $2 billion for stage 4, you know, that is not a good BCR. In fact, it's a very poor BCR. And this, I think, surely will be a better benefit cost ratio when I look at the numbers in those respective business cases.
Councillor Currick, you wish to speak to the motion?
Yeah, quickly, it'd just be really nice to see something delivered to help with the congestion on Hewletts Road. I mean, so many people are waiting for something to happen. And I recall back in the day with the Bay Park to Bay Fair project and some of the early design work there. And I approached NZTA just asking, well, what about the bottleneck, which will still be there once this B2B is finished? And the response back then was, oh, well, that's just another project for the future. And so, you know, I've always had concern about the long-term thinking of just going from one project to the next rather than joining it all up at an early time. And that's the problem we've got here. And I heard the word insurmountable or something around the view shaft to Moa. And if we can't grade separate it, then it sort of goes back to why build B2B. It's great for the afternoon peak, but the morning peak, it's now basically a car park for a length of time in the morning because you do have the bottleneck on Hewlett. So yeah, it'd be nice to see something happening, and perhaps the T3 lane, if that can be built sooner rather than later, because as indicated by, I think, Councillor Taylor, you asked the question about even taking a certain amount of traffic off, 10% makes a huge difference in terms of the travel time. So I think it's really a critical project. That route or improvement to that route will certainly help with, will deliver a large economic benefit for this community. So hopefully we'll see some progress. Thank you.
Councillor Baker.
Kia ora tātou. I hear a lot of the kōrero that's kind of been presented this morning and this afternoon, heka. I wish it was this morning. And I can't help but my mind draws back to the people of Whareroa. And it seems that a lot of this project is purely focused on addressing congestion or traffic, rather than considering and cementing the well-being of the people of Whareroa. So much continues to happen to and around this community, and never in direct benefit of a structure of this nature. An investment into Hewletts will only cement our position on the matters of Whareroa, and lack of care and regard for this community, who have arguably paid the greatest price for the growth of this city. Now, I support addressing congestion on Hewletts generally, but I can't support doing that when it further cripples the people of Whareroa and Ngāti Kuku. So until we put their needs and aspirations at the centre of growth in this area, I can't support any initiatives moving forward.
Do any other members wish to speak? Councillor Taylor.
Just wanted to talk about the possibility that we don't get NZTA funding. I think there's some parts of this project that need to be advanced, even if it is just TCC on their own. The shared lanes and that sort of stuff, reasonably inexpensive, and it could make a big difference to the city. So, I think we have to be ready for that if this business case doesn't actually get us anywhere at NZTA.
Deputy Mayor.
Thank you. I think D still needs to be clarified, and I don't think we should resolve to approve a commitment of budgeted funds, because I don't believe we're in the position to do that right now. Or to clarify which budget we're talking about that those funds are sitting in.
This is referring to subject to NZTA approval, so nothing's going to happen until they approve co-share. So are you proposing an amendment to what's currently on the table?
Yeah, from a financial discipline perspective, irrespective of whether we get NZTA approval or not, at the moment it says approves progressing with the project, including commitment of budgeted TCC share of project funds. And I don't know which budget they're in, and my understanding was that we're still talking about which of the annual plan and long-term plan budgets are able to be approved, and I don't want to approve one and not understand what the implications to all of that are. So it would just, I don't know if it's required to be in D. I think we
Nick, could
can
you have a go at
approve
answering
the
this?
commitment to it, but I don't know if we should be approving a budget because there's no number in there. What budget are we approving?
I think it's 1.5 million from the business case, which is 49% of the 3 million for our share.
So it's just of the next approves the,
Well, it's for the
Business
detailed
case.
business case, and there's two business cases of 3 million each, and we're saying we approve one. So I'm guessing that's in the,
I'd like that in the resolution then, please, because I read it that we're approving the project, the budget for the project. I know, but that's how I read it, and if other people might too. So can we include the number that we're approving?
Yeah, we can. I'll just look it up as it is being presented to the council meeting tomorrow. So if you give me a minute, I can look that up right now.
Is the mover of this motion and the seconder okay with this amendment? Go to where it's at?
This project being deprioritised within our prioritisation or reprioritisation process. So I'm fairly comfortable with what's worded there. It's pretty important.
How much are you approving?
Well, we had an indication before, Nick, is to confirm it shortly, but Glenn, perhaps you could help.
Yeah, I guess it was a question in my mind as to whether it's part of the TSP 002 Hewlett sub-area for prioritisation, 5.5 million, or whether it is coming from a budget in FY25, which we don't have visibility of. If it's for prioritisation, I think the Deputy Mayor's question is a good one, because it is not on the committed list, it's on the full prioritisation list. If it's actually in the current year's budget, then or in a committed part of next year's budget, to me, then that's probably fine as it is, I think. Yeah.
We're just pausing while we find an answer to the question. Bear with us.
We have 500,000 in the what's being presented as a high priority, but unable to fit within the target at the moment. So that is the one that is one of the projects that's up for debate tomorrow, as we go through all of the capital program. But I think because this is still subject to NZTA approval, I think we can stick to the NZTA approval and leave out the commitment of the budgeted TCC share, and that's right. Yeah.
so if we just look at 32 of that report, would this be correct as 24, 25, 1.65, 25, 26, 4.4, 26, 27, 7.1? Sorry, this is page 97 of the agenda, paragraph 32.
Yeah, so that speaks to what's in the current LTP, and not necessarily specific to what we're going through with the annual planning process now for establishing the 25-26 budget for the project.
Councillor, as the mover, you may ask the question.
Just the current, what I've got it, like the initial LTP, what is it, GOA list was for 2.05 million on Hewlett's improvements. And now what the mayor has just highlighted is 1.65 in this financial year. Is that sufficient to progress whatever work is needed to ensure we do get to the point of delivering to NZTA before we need to have another decision point? I guess I'm just wanting to make sure that everything can at least get smoothly till we hit their decision and then find out where we go from there.
Yeah, hi again. So in terms of the funding that was allocated in the LTP, particularly across the first 3 years, so the 1.65 in this financial year, 4.4 next year, and $7 million in 26-27 financial year, we're confident that that is appropriate to keep momentum to the program and meet the deliverables, particularly noting the next phase would be a detailed business case, which would take it's a reasonable investment, but there's plenty of funding there to progress that in the timeframes that you need to deliver it. But yeah, noting again that this was the budgets as allocated in the long-term plan. But yes, noting that through the annual plan prioritisation, that is up for debate as another item potentially tomorrow.
Rightio, we do actually have a motion on the table, so we need to keep this moving. Yes.
Does everyone agree?
Does move agree, second agree with removing reference to the TCC budget? Can we see that, please?
Recommendation D, yeah.
No.
No, just.
Everyone's happy with that? You happy with that, Nick?
Yeah, that's really good. Thank you. Yep. Good clarification.
All seen it. All those in favour of the motion, say aye. Against? Against? Councillor Baker is opposed. Motion is passed. Rightio, 9.3 is complete. Discussion of late items. There are no late items to be discussed. And I'd ask Councillor Baker if you would give us a closing karakia, please.
Kia ora tātou. Kia tāre watunga ki te kōrero ki te rangi koe e tēnei te whakawātea ki nei tūturu whakamaua kia tīna, haumie, huie, tae ki e.
I'd like to thank members, council staff for their presentations today, and I now declare the meeting closed.